I'm assuming I hand this to the bailiff.
Mr. Pryor, have you seen a copy of State's Exhibit 1?
I have gotten all of the exhibits at this point, but in terms of the numeric order that they're put in, I have seen that, Judge, and there's no objection to that.
Exhibit 1 will be admitted. Mr. Wood, would you like that to be handed to the witness?
Yes. And then, Your Honor, I have several more States Exhibit 2.
Exhibit 2 will be handed to the bailiff. Mr. Bailiff, if you'll please show that to Mr. Pryor. Mr. Pryor, any objection to the self-authentication of Exhibit 2 being admitted?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 2 will be admitted.
States Exhibit 3.
Ms. Bailiff, if you'll do the same with Exhibit 3. Mr. Pryor, any objection to Exhibit 3?
No objection, Your Honor.
Exhibit 3 will be admitted.
States Exhibit 4.
Any objection to Exhibit 4, Mr. Pryor?
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 4 will be admitted.
States Exhibit 5.
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 5 will be admitted.
Your Honor, States Exhibit 1 through 5 are all self-authenticating documents. I have 2 documents I will ask the court to take judicial notice of. The first is an order on a petition under the Child Protective Act in Madison County case CV 33-20-45 in the interest of Tylee Ashlyn Ryland and Joshua Jackson Vallow. This order was signed by yourself in that case.
Mr. Pryor, any objection to the court taking judicial notice of that document?
Judge, if I could have just one moment, may I, please?
No problem. Mr. Wood, you're not asking for that document to be marked?
We will ask for it to be marked and entered as an exhibit as well.
Okay, Exhibit 6. Is that correct?
Yes.
No objection.
Exhibit 6 will be admitted.
And then
Would you like me to just take that into the clerk's possession at this point, Mr. Wood?
yes, that would be fine.
Court will do so.
And one more document the state would ask the court to take judicial notice of, and that we'd ask, and at the end of the State's Exhibit 7, an order in that same child protection case deeming that Lori Vallow was served on January 25th and that any errors in that service were cured.
Okay. Exhibit 7.
No objection, Judge.
Exhibit 7 will be admitted. The court will take judicial notice of said exhibit. Mr. Wood, any other?
No, if I may inquire of the witness now.
You may inquire when you're ready.
Thank you. Mr. Hermosillo, will you state your name and spell it for the court?
Ray Dennis Hermosillo, RayDennis Hermosillo.
Thank you. What is your current occupation?
I'm a detective with the Rexburg City Police Department.
How long have you been a detective?
Over a year,
Okay. How long have you been with the Rexburg Police Department?
19 years.
Are you post-certified?
I am.
Detective, have you ever had the opportunity to meet the defendant, Chad Daybell?
Yes,
Is he here in the court today?
he is.
Can you point him out and describe what he's wearing?
Sitting at the defense table in a white shirt, blue tie.
Detective, how did you become involved in the investigation regarding J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan?
In early November, I was contacted by Gilbert Police Department. I was asked to seize a Jeep that was in Lori Vallow's possession. Along with that, I was asked to perform intermittent surveillance.
And did you do that for the Gilbert Police Department?
I did.
Okay. Did they ever ask you to do anything else?
Yes.
What was that?
I was asked to do a welfare check on November 25th,
Okay.
2019.
Oh, 2019?
Yes, sir.
Who were you asked to do a welfare check on?
A 7-year-old boy by the name of Joshua Jackson Vallow, who also went by JJ.
Okay, and is it all right with you if I just refer to that child as JJ from here on out?
Yes.
Okay. Detective, have you ever met JJ Vallow?
No.
Have you ever met Tylee Ryan?
No.
Okay. Through your investigation, have you learned what JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan looked like?
I have.
Okay. How have you done that?
I've seen hundreds of videos and photographs of Tylee and JJ both.
Okay. Detective, I'm going to ask you to look at State's Exhibit 1.
Before we get any further into this, let me just remind the media that pursuant to Idaho Court Administrative Rule 32, the court is prohibiting the photography or the filming of any exhibits until further order of the court. That would include, but not be limited to, any documents that are exhibits, any pictures that are exhibits, and any film that are exhibits that are going to be played potentially today. I will allow the cameras to remain running so that the audio can be recorded, but any photography or filming of any of those exhibits is prohibited. Also, any filming or recording of any of the table of the defense, any notes or anything else is prohibited, as well as the state. So with that, Mr. Wood, you may proceed.
Thank you. Detective, do you have State's Exhibit 1?
I do.
What is that document?
This is a birth certificate for Kanan Trajan.
For who?
Kanan Trajan,
Okay. And what is Kanan Trahan's birth date?
May 25th, 2012.
Okay. And who are Kanan Trahan's parents listed as?
Dennis Trahan and Mandy Ledger.
Okay. Thank you. Detective, can you look at State's Exhibit 2? What is that document?
An adoption decree.
Okay. Who is listed on that adoption decree? Who is the child listed on that adoption decree?
Kanan Trajan.
Kanan Trajan. Who are the adoptive parents of Kanan Trajan?
Mr. Wood, I'm having a hard time hearing. Are you saying Kanan?
Kanan.
Kanan, can you have the witness spell that name, please?
Canaan.
And the last name?
Trahan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who are the adoptive parents of Kanan Trajan?
Leland Charles Anthony Vallow and Lori Noreen Cox Vallow.
Okay. And does that document contain a name change for Kanan Trajan?
It does.
What is his name changed to?
Joshua Jackson Vallow.
Okay. Detective, will you look at State's Exhibit 3? What is that document?
A birth certificate.
Who is it a birth certificate for?
Joshua Jackson Vallow.
Okay, and what is the birth date listed on that?
May 25th, 2012.
Thank you. Will you look at State's Exhibit 4? What is that document?
A birth certificate.
Who is it a birth certificate for?
Tylee Ashlyn Ryan.
What is her birth date listed?
9/24/2002.
And who are the parents listed on that?
Joseph Anthony Ryan Jr. and Lori Noreen Cox.
Okay. And Detective, will you look at State's Exhibit 5? What is that?
A marriage certificate.
Who is it a marriage certificate for?
Chad Guy Daybell and Lori Noreen Ryan Vallow.
Okay, and what is the date of marriage?
November 5th, 2019.
And where was that certificate of marriage issued?
In Hawaii, on the island of Kauai.
Okay, thank you. Detective, you testified earlier you were asked to do a welfare check, correct?
Correct.
What did you do in response to that welfare check?
On November 26th, 2019, myself and Detective Hope went to 565 Pioneer Road, which was Lori Vallow's residence. We ended up making contact with the defendant, Mr. Daybell, and Alex Cox.
I'm going to stop
outside.
you there. Who was Alex Cox?
Alex Cox is Lori's brother.
Okay. So you made contact with them. What happened?
I made contact with Alex and asked Alex if Lori was home.
How did he respond?
Judge, I'm going to object hearsay.
Mr. Wood?
Your Honor, this is a statement of a co-conspirator coming in. He is an unavailable witness because he's no longer living, but it's still a statement of a co-conspirator, and I think it comes in.
Mr. Pryor, let you respond to that.
Judge, I'd like to see the court documents that list Mr. Alex Cox as a co-conspirator. I don't believe those documents are presently in existence at this point, so I have nothing that supports that other than Mr. Wood's statement.
Mr. Wood?
Your Honor, the complaint alleges Mr. Daybell, Mrs. Vallow, conspirators known and known, and the probable cause affidavit clearly lists Alex Cox as a co-conspirator.
Mr. Pryor, it appears that Mr. Wood is explaining that because it is information communicated between co-conspirators named in a criminal complaint, it falls under the rule of non-hearsay under the Idaho criminal rules. Do you wish, or excuse me, the Idaho rules of evidence. Do you wish to respond to that?
Judge, the complaint also lists known and unknown. So at this point, if we go by Mr. Wood's analysis, anybody could be listed or mentioned as a co-conspirator, and all sorts of information can come in. So at this point, I stand by my initial response, which is, at least from my reading of the pleadings and the current criminal charges that are filed, there are two people that are alleged in this thing. And at that point, that's what I believe the proper application of the rule is.
Court is going to overrule the objection. The court finds that Alex Cox is named in the criminal complaint. At this juncture, we're at a preliminary hearing stage where probable cause is the standard. Mr. Pryor, if there are other co-conspirators that are named or that are brought up here today, you may renew your objection, or you may renew your objection in a further time if you feel that the allegation has not been presented sufficiently enough to show that Mr. Cox is a co-conspirator, but I am going to allow it. Under 801, the exception that allows for co-conspirator communication to be admitted. So with that, Mr. Wood, you may continue to inquire.
Thank you. Detective, can you answer that question?
Can you ask it one more time, please?
Yes. So, well, you had testified you made contact with Mr. Daybell and Mr. Cox. What did you ask Mr. Cox?
I asked Mr. Cox if Lori Vallow was home.
How did he respond?
He stated she was not home.
Okay. What happened after that?
I asked Alex if JJ was home. I informed Mr. Cox why I was there is to do a welfare check on JJ. So I asked him if he was there.
How did he respond?
Initially, he didn't respond. He just looked at the defendant Daybell and didn't answer my question initially.
Okay. And then what happened?
I asked him again, and he stated that Joshua was with his grandma Kay in Louisiana.
Okay. How did you respond to that?
I told Mr. Cox that was unlikely because Kay was the one who originally called in the welfare check.
All right. What happened after that?
I asked Mr. Cox how I can get a hold of Lori and asked him for her phone number.
How did he respond?
He stated he didn't have it.
Okay. What did that make you think when he told you he didn't have his phone number?
Judge, I'm going to object.
Reason?
Judge, this witness can offer his recitation of the facts, but if we're going to start getting into the issue of whether or not he gets to present his impression in terms of what a third party had told him, I think is inappropriate.
Mr. Wood, can you repeat the question for the court?
The question was what Detective Hermosillo thought of Mr. Cox's response that he did not have Lori Vallow's phone number.
Mr. Wood, you want to respond to the objection made by Mr. Pryor?
Your Honor, I'm not aware of any rule that doesn't allow the detective to describe his thoughts on an investigation.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Mr. Hermosillo, you can give your thoughts as to what you were feeling at that time. Mr. Pryor, if that goes beyond thoughts, you're welcome to re-up your objection, and I'll retake it up to.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Wood.
Can you answer the question?
I thought it was suspicious because I knew that they had been close based on my initial investigation.
Okay. What happened after that, Detective?
I asked Mr. Cox where I could find Lori so I can make contact with her. And he stated that she was in apartment 107.
Okay. Once you learned that information, what did you do?
Myself and Detective Dave Hope then went to 107 to attempt to make contact with Lori.
What happened there?
Detective Dave Hope went to knock on the front door. As he was knocking on the front door, I saw the defendant Daybell driving towards me in his black Equinox.
Okay. And what did you do?
I stopped Mr. Daybell to further speak with him.
Yeah. Did you ask him any questions?
I did.
What did you ask him?
I asked Mr. Daybell when's the last time he saw JJ, and he stated that he saw JJ in apartment 107 in October.
Okay. Now, apartment 107, do you know who, you stated this was on 565 Pioneer Road. Do you know who apartment 107 belonged to, or who lived in that apartment?
Not at that time.
Okay. What happened after he gave you that answer?
I asked Mr. Daybell for Lori Vallow's phone number, and he stated he didn't have it.
Okay. What did you think when he told you he didn't have her number?
I again found it suspicious because I knew that they were married 2 weeks prior to my contact with Mr. Daybell.
Okay, and again, just for clarification, what was the date we're talking about now? What was that date?
November 26th, 2019.
Did you ask Mr. Daybell any other questions?
I did. I asked Mr. Daybell how he knew Lori Vallow, and he stated that he had only met her a couple times. Where we were speaking. I again asked Mr. Daybell if he had Lori's phone number, and at that point, he gave me Lori Vallow's phone number.
Okay, did you ask him why he hadn't given you that number?
I did.
And what was his response?
He stated and called Lieutenant Ron Ball to respond to my location. Based on Mr. Daybell's actions, Mr. Cox's actions, what I was told about them hardly knowing each other, I felt there was something more going on with the whereabouts of JJ, so I wanted more officers over there so we could figure out what was going on.
Okay, and then what happened after that?
Lieutenant Ron Ball, Detective Dave Stubbs, and Officer Kellen Wett responded over to 565 Pioneer.
Okay, and then what happened?
Myself and Lieutenant Ron Ball attempted to make contact with Lori in apartment 175 and were unable to make contact with anybody in apartment 175.
Okay, what did you do after that?
We went to apartment 174, which was Melanie Boudreau's apartment.
And stopped right there. Who is Melanie Boudreau?
It's Lori's niece.
Okay. And then what happened?
We were unable to make contact with anybody there as well.
Okay. So what did you do after that?
I was instructed by Lieutenant Ron Ball to go to the prosecutor's office and obtain a search warrant.
Is that what you did?
I went to the prosecutor's office, yes.
Did you obtain a search warrant that day?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did you have any contact with Lori Vallow that day?
I did not have any contact with Lori, no.
Okay. Were you still with Detective Hope?
I was.
Do you know if he had contact with Lori Vallow that day?
He did.
Okay. Do you know?
Judge, could I have some foundation as to,
I can lay that.
All right.
You were with Detective Hope that day?
Yes,
Do you know if he ever attempted to call Lori Vallow with the number you were given?
he did. He attempted to call Lori Vallow on the way to the prosecutor's office.
Okay. And did he ever get in touch with her? Did she ever answer the phone when he called?
No, he was able to leave a message on her voicemail.
Okay. And were you with him when he did that?
I was not with him when he did that.
Judge, I'm going
Okay.
to move to strike.
Okay, reason?
Well, Judge, he has no basis other than what he was told, obviously, if he wasn't present during that conversation. I'm not sure how he can admit that conversation since he wasn't present for that. And the only way he would know that is if either Lieutenant Ball or someone else told him that that took place. It's hearsay at this point, and it's not admissible.
Your Honor, we'll just move on. It's fine.
All right, that will be stricken.
I would do ask that it be stricken from the record, though.
That conversation will be stricken from the record, just so I'm clear, Mr. Pryor, the conversation between Mr. Ball and,
Your Honor, I believe it was Detective Hope that Detective
I
Stubbs listed.
apologize. I said Lieutenant Ball. Lieutenant Ball?
Detective Hope.
Detective Ball. I apologize. I meant Officer Hope. I apologize.
that conversation will be stricken.
Detective, during your investigation that day, were you able to locate JJ Vallow?
No.
Okay. Did you, have you spoken with Detective Ball and Detective Stubbs about their investigation that day?
I have.
Do
you know if parts of their investigation were on body cam?
It was.
Judge, I'm going to object again, foundation.
Mr. Wood? Mr. Pryor, the question was if Mr. or Officer Hermosillo knew if it was on body cam. So I'm going to overrule that objection. That's just a question for Mr. Hermosillo. Obviously, what's in the body cam is probably a different story. You may proceed.
Thank you.
Mr. Hermosillo, you may answer that question.
It was on body cam.
Okay. Have you had an opportunity to watch that body cam?
Yes.
Okay. I asked you earlier if you were able
Judge,
to.
could we approach, please?
You may. Would you like to do that back in chambers?
No, no.
I'll instruct the media to make sure that recording is not taking place here. We'll go back on the record. Court took a brief sidebar to discuss an evidentiary issue. Mr. Wood, you may ask that question again, please.
Detective Hermosillo, have you watched the body cam video of Detective Stubbs?
Yes.
Okay. Did you obtain a search warrant on November 26th?
On November 26th?
Yes.
No.
Okay. I'm going to call your attention to November 27th, 2019. What did you do in furtherance of your investigation on November 27th?
We were able to obtain a search warrant for apartments 175, 174, and 107 at
Okay.
565 Pioneer.
And what was the purpose of searching those apartments?
To locate JJ.
Okay. At this time, were you searching for Tylee Ryan?
No,
Were you aware of Tylee Ryan at this time?
no.
So where did you search?
All three apartments.
Okay, and just for clarity of the record, those three apartments are 175, 174, and 107 on 565 Pioneer Road?
That's correct.
Thank you. Were you able to locate JJ in any of those apartments?
No, we were not.
Okay. Did you find, what evidence, if any, did you find to suggest he had been living there in any of those apartments?
In 175, there was a half-empty prescription bottle of Resperdone and also a suitcase that had JJ's name on it.
Okay, and that prescription bottle, did that have JJ's name on it?
It did.
Was there anything else of interest to you in searching those apartments?
Yes.
What was that?
The apartments appeared to be lived in. There was food in the refrigerator, food in the pantry, furniture. The only thing that was off in 175 was it appeared that there was no clothes. Everything had been taken off the hangers and there was no clothes in the dresser drawers.
Okay. Did all three apartments appear to be lived in at the moment?
No.
Oh, can you elaborate on that?
107 was completely vacant.
Okay. Did you obtain another search warrant that day?
We did.
What caused you to obtain another search warrant?
During the initial search of 175 in the master bedroom, a rental agreement was located for a self-storage unit on Airport Road.
All right. Do you know the name of that storage unit?
Self-storage.
Self-storage. Oh, okay, I apologize. I misheard you. Do you know the number of the storage unit?
I believe it was C-52.
Okay. And did you execute that search warrant?
We did.
What did you find?
There was some winter clothing in a couple of boxes, a couple of children's bikes, and in the winter clothing, there was a couple personalized blankets that had the pictures, looked like family pictures that were sewn onto the blankets.
Okay. Detective, what city are those apartments located in?
I'm sorry,
What city were those apartments located in?
Rexburg,
Okay. And what county is Rexburg in?
Madison County.
Thank you. Detective, at the end of November 27th, had you located JJ Vallow?
No, we had not.
Okay. What was the next step in your investigation?
Well, our next step was we were just trying to locate JJ. We had obtained search warrants for cell phone data, spoke to numerous friends of the family.
Judge, could I get some foundation, please? That's a very broad statement regarding phone records and discussing witnesses with family.
So you're making an objection on foundational purposes, is that correct?
It is, Judge. Thank you.
Right. Mr. Wood?
I'll lay some more foundation, Your Honor. As part of your investigation, did you try to locate individuals who may have known Chad Daybell or Lori Vallow?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Who were some of those individuals?
Family and friends.
Okay. Do you know any of their names?
Melanie Boudreau, Ian Pulowski, Gilbert Police had contacted family members in Arizona.
Okay. All right. Did you engage the help of any other law enforcement agencies?
We did. We asked for assistance from the FBI.
Okay. While you were searching for JJ Vallow, at any time did Lori Vallow or Chad Daybell, to your knowledge, ever call the Rexburg Police to report missing children?
No, in fact, we attempted several times to get a hold of Lori, and her cell phone was shut off. We attempted to get a hold of Chad and never gotten any return phone calls. And in fact, they retained an attorney and refused to answer any questions.
Detective, during your search for JJ, did that investigation ever grow to include Tyree Ryan?
It did.
Why was that?
In speaking with family members, we were also told that nobody
Judge,
had.
I'm going to object at this point.
What grounds?
Well, it's hearsay. If he's going to start, and of course, nodding his head, obviously, if he's going to start reciting what other people have told him, other than what is permissible under the rules, that's hearsay, Judge. It's not admissible.
Mr. Wood, you wish to respond to that
Yes,
objection?
Your Honor, I think it comes in for the effective on the listener to explain what the investigator did.
Can you give me the specific exception under Rule 801?
Yes.
Are you looking at 803, Mr. Wood?
Yes, Your Honor.
And will you give me which subsection you're looking at?
Your Honor, I think it comes in under 803.1, the present sense impression explains the what Detective Hermosillo learned and why he did what he did based on that.
Mr. Pryor?
Judge, in response, that's not a present sense impression. What it is there's an investigation that's going on, and what Mr. Wood is attempting to do is to get statements from witnesses who are not here today. It's clearly hearsay, Judge. His initial response, obviously, in terms of why it comes in, was not appropriate, and this one's just as not proper in terms of a present sense impression. Not only hasn't been a proper foundation to suggest there's a present sense impression, which he needs to first establish that. Secondly, if this witness would like to talk about actions that he took, I'm not going to tell Mr. Wood how to get any evidence in, but if he would like to talk about any actions this officer took as a result of talking with other people, he can do that. But clearly, the statements of those other people does not come in. It's hearsay. It's not admissible under any of the exceptions.
Mr. Wood, any other response?
Yes, Your Honor. Again, it's not coming in for the truth of the matter. It's coming in to establish why Mr. Hermosillo or Detective Hermosillo and his team did what they did.
And Judge, that's not necessary for you to bring in the statements then. All you have to do is say, officer, and I'm not again telling Mr. Wood how to try his case, but quite honestly, Judge, if he suggests to this officer, officer, did you take any action based on what information you received from family members, we can move forward with this thing. But again, I stand by my initial objection. It is not permissible or appropriate for him to get in information from those other family members. There is another manner in which he can proceed if he wants to proceed that way. But getting those statements in is clearly inadmissible.
Mr. Wood, I'm going to sustain the objection as it pertains to specifics to what the family members stated. Those are hearsay. If there are specific statements that you're looking to get in that are not truth of the matter asserted, I'll let you continue and you can try to see what can happen. But if you're looking for specific instances or specific statements that have been made by the family members pertaining to the investigation, I'm going to sustain the objection as hearsay.
That's fine, Your Honor. Thank you. Detective, did you take any steps to learn if Lori Vallow had any other children?
We did.
Okay, what steps were those?
We spoke with family members. We spoke with her son, Colby Ryan.
Okay. And did you, in your investigation, did that investigation grow from searching just for JJ to searching for JJ and Tyler Ryan?
Yes, it did.
Thank you.
Exhibit 8 will be handed to the witness. Mr. Pryor, just so I'm clear, there's no objection to Exhibit 8 being admitted. Is that correct?
That's correct, Your Honor.
Exhibit 8 will be admitted.
Your Honor, I'd also ask that the witness be handed State's Exhibit 9.
Any objection to that admission?
No, Judge.
Exhibit 9 will be admitted.
Detective Hermosillo, can you look at State's Exhibit 8? Are you familiar with that,
I
with that
am.
exhibit?
Yes.
And what is it?
It's a photograph of JJ, Tyler Ryan, and Alex Cox.
Okay, do you know where that photograph came from?
I do.
Where?
It was obtained through a search warrant from Chandler Police Department from one of Lori Vallow's iCloud accounts.
Okay, and have you had the opportunity to review the pictures on that iCloud account?
Yes, I have.
And so you recognize that picture.
Yes.
Can you tell the court what is in that picture?
It appears they're in West Yellowstone National Park.
Okay. And who all is in that picture?
JJ, Tyler, and Alex Cox.
Okay. Do you know what date that picture was taken?
September 8th,
Okay.
2019.
Pardon?
September 8th, 2019.
Thank you. Can you look at State's Exhibit 9? Do you recognize that picture?
I do.
And have you seen it before?
Yes, I have.
Do you know where that picture came from?
Yes.
Can you tell the court?
It was also obtained through a search warrant from Chandler Police Department from Lori's iCloud account,
Okay. Do you know what date that picture was taken?
September 22nd, 2019.
Okay, and who is in that picture?
It's JJ sitting on a couch.
Okay. Detective, as part of your investigation, did you attempt to locate or let me rephrase that. As part of your investigation, did you look for proof of life of JJ and Tylee?
We did.
And what, for his purposes of your investigation, would suffice for proof of life?
We had set up a hotline through NCMEC, which is National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We also had a hotline set up through the FBI, and we would receive hundreds of tips on possible sightings of JJ and Tylee.
Okay. And would you follow up on those tips and sightings as part of your investigation?
We would.
And is it fair to say that a photograph of the child that you could recognize as a child could be considered proof of life?
Yes.
Detective, have you found any photographs of Tylee Ryan after September 8th, 2019 that
No.
you can positively identify as being taken after September 8th, 2019?
No, we have not.
Okay. In your investigation, have you found any photographs after September 22nd, 2019 of JJ that can be positively identified as JJ?
No, we have not.
Okay. Detective, have you been able to verify through any tip or lead any other verifiable sighting of Tylee Ryan after September 8th, 2019?
No.
And have you been able to verify through your investigation, or find, I should say, through your investigation, any other verifiable sighting of JJ Vallow after September 22nd?
No.
Okay. Detective, are you aware if a Child Protection Act was filed for JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan in Madison County, Idaho?
Yes, I am.
Were you involved in that?
I was.
How?
I was the affiant.
Okay. Do you remember when that was filed?
I believe it was January 16th, 2020.
Okay. And are you familiar with the initial order in that action?
Yes.
Did that order, let me ask this, did that order pertain to Mr. Daybell?
No, it did not.
Okay. Who did it pertain to?
Lori Vallow.
Did that order instruct Lori Vallow to do anything?
It instructed her to bring her minor children to the Rexburg Police Department or the Department of Health and Welfare within 5 days of being served.
Okay. And are you aware if Lori Vallow was ever served with that?
She was.
Okay. Do you remember what date she was served with that?
January 25th, 2020.
Okay. After that was filed, were you ever able to locate Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow?
Yes.
How did you do that?
Through tips and obtaining search warrants for cell phone data.
Okay. Where did you believe they were located?
In Hawaii, on the island of Kauai.
Okay. And did you ever have an opportunity to go there?
I did.
Okay. What did you do while you were there?
Judge, could I have some foundation, please?
Can you give some specifics as far as
Date, time, place,
Mr. Wood?
when he left, when he came back?
You bet. Do you remember when you went to Hawaii?
January 24th, 2020.
Okay. Do you remember when you returned from Hawaii?
I don't remember the date.
Okay. What island of Hawaii were you on, or did you travel to?
Kauai.
Okay. Oh, and again, what was the purpose of you traveling to the island of Kauai?
To assist the Kauai Police Department with serving Lori Vallow that court order.
Okay. And when you say the order, you're referring to that child protection order we just discussed?
Yes.
Okay. Did you do anything else while you were there?
We also assisted with surveillance.
Okay. While you were there, did you ever see JJ Vallow or Tylee Ryan?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did you do anything else in furtherance of your investigation while you were there?
Yes, I did.
What was that?
I observed Kauai Police Department execute a search warrant on the defendant Daybell's vehicle and also their residence in Princeville.
Okay. Did you actually do the search, or did you just observe Kauai Police Department do that?
No, I just observed.
Okay. When you observed them, did you say you observed them search a vehicle?
Yes,
Do you know what kind of vehicle it was?
it was an SUV.
Okay.
Detective Hermosillo, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. If you don't mind speaking up just a little bit.
Okay, I'll scoot closer. Is that better?
Yeah, and if you point that microphone up, but aim it at your chin, it'll make a better record. There you go.
All right. That vehicle, had you observed Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow in that vehicle?
Yes,
And when you observed the Kauai Police Department search it, were Chad and Lori in the vehicle at the time it was searched?
no, not at the time it was searched.
Well, let me rephrase that. Had you seen them in it directly before it was searched?
Yes,
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to observe the items that were taken from that vehicle?
some of them.
Some of them? From what you observed, did you observe anything that would indicate that J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan had been in that vehicle?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did you help, or did you observe any other search warrants being served?
Yes, on their residence on Queen Emma Drive in Princeville.
Okay. Did you enter that residence?
I did.
Did you walk through the whole residence?
Not the entire residence.
Okay. What portion of that residence did you walk through?
The downstairs bedroom area and the upstairs living room.
Okay. In any of the areas you observed, did you observe anything that would indicate, did you observe anything that would indicate that J.J. Vallow had been there?
No,
Did you observe anything that would indicate that Tylee Ryan had been there?
no.
Okay. Detective, after you returned from Kauai, did you ever have a reason to go back to Kauai?
I did.
And what was that?
To also assist the Kauai Police Department with the arrest warrant of Lori Vallow.
Okay. Do you know what she was arrested for?
Minor or desertion of her minor children, 2 counts and 3 misdemeanors.
Okay.
Judge, can I also have some foundation, date, time, place?
Yes. When approximately did you return to Kauai?
Middle of February.
Okay. Do you recall what day you returned from Kauai?
A couple days after she was arrested, which was February 20th, so a couple days after that.
Okay. Did you ever have an opportunity to be in court with the defendant Vallow?
Yes,
Did you observe if she was notified of her charges?
she was.
Were you able to observe if the defendant Chad Daybell was present in the courtroom?
Yes, he was.
Detective, as part of your investigation, did you help execute a search warrant on Chad Daybell's residence?
Judge, could I have some foundation again? I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but if we could have a date, time, place, and I can get some of this in cross in terms of his representations, the last one about the middle of February. I would think that he'd have a more specific time in mind, but if we could have some specifics, I would appreciate it in terms of the date and time.
Are you talking about the courtroom issue or the warrant
I'm
issue?
talking about the warrant issue.
All right, Mr. Wood, it sounds like you asked the question if a warrant was done. I'll let Mr. Hermosillo answer that question. Then as far as the foundational issue, I'll sustain that objection. Mr. Wood, you'll need to lay some foundation.
Okay. Detective, as part of your investigation, on June 9th of 2020, Did anything significant happen that day?
Yes,
Okay. Where did that happen?
in Fremont County at Mr. Daybell's residence,
Do you know the address?
202 North, 1900 East.
Have you observed Mr. Daybell at that residence?
Yes,
Okay. What was your purpose of being at that residence?
to serve a search warrant of the property.
Okay. And did you, I believe you already said this, but just for clarity of the record, what county is that residence located at?
Fremont County.
Okay. Detective, what was the first thing you did in serving that warrant on June 9th?
We walked up to the front door to make contact with Mr. Daybell.
And what did you do after that?
We were able to make contact with Mr. Daybell's son, who answered the front door. He and another son led us into Mr. Daybell's room, where he was told that we had a search warrant for the property.
Okay, and then what happened?
Mr. Daybell came out of the room. He was able to sit in the kitchen area. He was allowed to speak with his attorney inside the kitchen area.
Okay. What happened after that?
Mr. Daybell was told if he wanted to stay on the property, which he could have, he would have to be accompanied by an officer for officer safety reasons. He was also told he was free to leave the residence if he wanted to.
Okay, and then what happened?
Mr. Daybell left and went and sat in his vehicle, which was parked in the driveway facing west off of 1900 East.
Okay. Your Honor, the state does have a demonstrative exhibit. We'd like to show the witness for purposes of clarity for the court and to further help the court understand what the detective is describing.
All right. Can you show that demonstrative exhibit to Mr. Pryor, please?
Your Honor, may I set up the easel and?
You may. Mr. Pryor, an objection?
No, Judge.
Mr. Wood, have you marked this exhibit?
We have not yet, Your Honor. Your Honor, does the court have a preference on how a demonstrative exhibit is marked?
No. Why don't we just mark it as the next number that you've got there? I believe the last exhibit that was marked as Exhibit 9. This would be Exhibit 10.
Your Honor, I will mark it as such.
It'll be marked as Exhibit 10. Mr. Pryor, just so I'm clear, any objection to the publishing and or the admission of Exhibit 10 for demonstrative purposes?
I'm sorry, Judge.
Just so I'm clear, Mr. Pryor, any objection to the publication and or the admission of Exhibit 10 for demonstrative purposes?
No, Judge, but what I would like to do is leave that up because I'm probably going to use that on cross of this officer. So my preference is that if when Mr. Wood is done, that remain up so that I can use it again as part of my cross-examination, if I may, Judge.
That's fine. We'll probably move it to the side
Okay.
if there's something that happens after this between you and cross-examination, but we'll make sure that it's available to you at cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Wood, you may inquire.
Before I do, Mr. Pryor, can you do that?
I can. Thank you, Mr. Wood.
And can the court and?
I can.
Okay, Detective Permacio, do you recognize that that exhibit, State's Exhibit 10?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's an aerial photograph of Mr. Daybell's property.
Okay. Again, what county is that in?
Fremont County.
Now, do you recall Mr. Daybell's address?
202 North, 1900 East.
Okay. Detective, you were, correct me if I'm wrong, you were talking about what happened that morning. You'd served the warrant on Mr. Daybell. And then I believe you stated that he had gotten in his vehicle. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And can you, Your Honor, I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this with the COVID restrictions and plexiglass. So I guess we'll just take it as it goes.
If you're going to ask him to leave the witness, we'll call it the cubicle, I will ask Mr. or Detective Hermosillo to put his mask on when he goes out there to point at the, there's a laser light over there too, Mr. Wood, if you'd like him to use that.
That would be perfect.
Okay.
Can you make sure, Detective, that laser light works?
Yep.
Okay. And can the court and defense see that?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Okay, Detective Hermosillo, can you point to where you observed Mr. Daybell in his vehicle, like you were describing?
Mr. Daybell was in this vehicle here, facing westbound. This is 1900 East.
Okay. Where were you standing?
I was standing right here, and then I was at Mr. Daybell's driver's door speaking with him, just briefly asking if he needed a coat or anything out of the house.
Okay. And were you able to clearly view Mr. Daybell?
Yes.
Okay. What did you observe when you were watching Mr. Daybell?
Mr. Daybell was on the phone, sitting in the driver's seat. He had the phone in his right hand and was intently continuing looking over his right shoulder. He would look over his right shoulder for a while, break contact, talk on the phone for a second, and then he would continue looking back over his right shoulder,
Okay.
pretty intently over his right shoulder.
Did you have an opportunity to stand in roughly that same location that he had been in that day?
Yes.
Okay. For purposes of your investigation, did you attempt to orient yourself towards, in the same manner that you viewed Mr. Daybell orient himself?
Yes.
Okay. When you did that, what did you see?
Well, the second time Mr. Daybell had got out of the vehicle and went to the back of his vehicle, he was wearing a hat. He stood at the back of his vehicle looking in the same direction he was looking when he was inside the driver's seat. He took off his hat, ran his fingers through his hair, looked down towards the ground, put his hat back on, went back inside the driver's seat of that vehicle.
Okay. Now, a detective, I don't think you quite understood my question. I apologize, must not have been very clear. Did you ever stand in that same location that day?
I did. I was talking with Mr. Daybell while he was outside of his vehicle.
Okay. And did you ever orient yourself in the same direction that you viewed Mr. Daybell orient himself?
Yes.
And when you oriented yourself in that same direction, what did you find yourself looking at?
The north side of the property at the pond area.
Okay. Now, when you say the pond area, can you identify that?
This here is the pond area.
Okay.
And there's a tree just to the north, just on the outer side of the pond.
Okay. Now, Detective, you testified earlier you were there to serve a search warrant, correct?
Yes.
Who were Rexburg police officers involved in serving that warrant?
Yes, Rexburg was involved.
Were there other law enforcement agencies involved in executing that warrant?
Yes, there was.
Okay. What other agencies were involved?
Fremont County Sheriff's Department and the FBI ERT team,
All right. Do you know what ERT stands for?
Evidence Response Team, or Recovery Team, I'm sorry.
Okay. Detective, I'm going to call your attention to that pond area that you just previously pointed at. Did you observe the ERT team engage in any activity on that spot that day?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What did you first observe?
I first observed the ERT team marking off different areas and grading different areas in the backyard of Mr. Daybell's property.
Okay.
Judge, could I have some time and foundation in terms of approximately what time did he observe that taking place?
I'll lay that
Yes.
foundation, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Approximately what time did you see that happen?
Roughly around 9 in the morning.
What time, and to further lay that foundation, what time did you arrive at Mr. Daybell's property approximately that day?
Approximately 7 a.m.
Okay. So you just testified that around 9 you saw them grading off certain areas. What did you observe after that?
I observed the evidence response recovery team and also cadaver dogs working the entire backyard. So they worked the pond area and then they had marked off other areas inside the backyard.
Okay. And again, at that pond area, what did you observe after you saw the cadaver dogs and the grading?
They had found an area of interest and had started focusing on the area right underneath the tree.
Okay, and did you go over to that area yourself?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Were you able to identify yourself the area of interest they were looking at?
Yes.
Was there anything that stood out to you in that area?
Yes.
What was that?
There appeared to be, and this is just a guess, but about a 4x2 area of sod, what I can best describe as sod, in a shorter grass in an area of longer weed growth. So that 4x2 area stuck out based on the greenery around it.
Okay. And then what did you observe the ERT team do there?
They began pulling up the sod and topsoil.
And then what did they do?
They continued to methodically remove dirt.
Judge, can I inquire in aid of objection?
You may.
Judge, can I inquire as to whether the officer was specifically present at the time that these actions were taking place, or did he return back to Mr. Daybell's vehicle?
You may ask the question. Detective Hermosillo, I'm going to direct you to answer that question.
Yes, I was there.
You were there at the pond and the tree.
That is correct.
Thank you, Judge.
Mr. Wood, you may proceed.
Thank you. I believe you just testified they started removing, I think you called it sod. Is that accurate?
Yes.
What did you observe them do what did you observe as they removed that sod?
They removed some topsoil that was right underneath the sod, which revealed 3 large white rocks, flat rocks.
Okay, and can you explain for the court how those rocks were oriented?
In a row. So there was a large rock, a large rock, and a large rock.
Okay. After you observed that, what did you observe next?
They removed the rocks, and underneath the white rocks was some thin wood paneling.
Okay. And what did you observe them do with that paneling?
They removed the paneling.
Okay. And then what did you observe?
Initially, as soon as they removed the paneling, I could smell the odor of a decomposing body.
Okay, Detective. I'm going to ask you some questions on that. Through your training and experience, have you had multiple occasions to be around deceased bodies?
Yes.
What are some circumstances in which you would, in the course of your duties, be around that?
In the last 19 years, I've been on plenty of suicides that had been left in apartments that were decomposing, various states. Also unattended deaths, various ages of people. So during the 19 years, I've been to a lot of those.
Okay. And is it your testimony that, to your perception, that state of a body, a deceased body, in some sense of decomposition, has a specific smell that you recognize?
Yes,
Okay. And it is your testimony that you recognize that smell at that location?
that's correct.
Okay. After you noticed that smell, what did you observe?
I observed the ERT team methodically move away more soil from that area.
All right. And then what happened?
They removed some soil and there was once they removed some soil, there was a black, what I can best describe as a black plastic bag with a round object protruding through the dirt.
Okay. What did you observe the ER team do after you saw that?
They dug a little bit more around the round object, which appeared to me to be the crown of a head, protruding through the dirt. They used a small, sharp instrument to cut through the black plastic.
Okay. And what did you observe when they did that?
There was a white plastic underneath the black plastic, and they also used the white instrument to cut through the white plastic.
Okay. And what did you observe when they did that?
I observed what looked to be brown human hair.
Okay. Once that was discovered, what did you observe the ER team to, what did you observe the ERT team do?
They continued to just work around the head that was exposed. They took pictures, they did whatever their team leader instructed them to do.
Okay. Was an item of interest eventually pulled out of that area?
Yes.
And can you describe what that item of interest looked like?
It was what appeared to be a small body tightly wrapped in black plastic, covered in duct tape.
Okay. After that item was recovered, what did you observe happen with that item?
That item was then placed into the back of the coroner's vehicle.
Okay. And did you have an opportunity to observe what the coroner did with it?
Yes.
About what time of day was this?
Roughly 11
Okay.
in the morning.
What did you observe the coroner do with that item of interest?
The coroner brought the bag up to Madison Memorial, where it was placed in the morgue.
Okay. And were you in the vehicle with the county coroner, or did you observe that from another vehicle?
I was not in the vehicle. I was following directly behind the coroner's vehicle.
Did you ever lose sight of that vehicle?
No, I did not.
Okay. And did you watch that item of interest be placed in the hospital morgue?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Detective, while you were observing what happened at the ERT site, at that site we've just discussed north of the pond, did you ever leave that site for any purpose?
Yes, I did.
What did you do? Well, about what time did you leave that site?
Before noon.
Okay. And what did you do?
I assisted Sergeant Eric Wheeler in placing Mr. Daybell into custody off of a traffic stop.
Okay. Detective, after you observed the county coroner take that item of interest up to the Madison Memorial Hospital, did you return to the Daybell property?
Yes, I did.
What did you do there?
I assisted the other ERT members in excavating different areas on Mr. Daybell's property.
Okay. Can you show the court the areas you assisted in excavation?
And Judge, so that we have a clear record, could you also vocalize that as well, please?
That's fine. Mr. Hermosillo, I'm going to direct you to shine your laser pointer at that and also verbalize what you're describing, what you're pointing at.
I'm pointing to a fire pit on Mr. Daybell's property, just northwest of the fire pit. There is what we've referred to the pet cemetery, and it's just north of the pet cemetery where I helped excavate.
Okay. And that area that you just referred to as a pet cemetery, why did you call it a pet cemetery?
There was pets buried there.
Okay. Were you able to identify you said they're pets. So when you say pets, are you referring to non-human animals?
That's correct.
Okay.
And Judge, could I inquire again in terms of aid of objection?
You may.
Thank you. Officer, you had mentioned that there were pets buried there. Can you give me the source of the information that advised you that there were pets buried there?
I assisted in digging them up. There was a dog and a cat.
Did you dig up the entire pet cemetery?
I personally did not dig up the entire
Did
pit.
anybody dig up the entire pet cemetery?
I can't answer that.
Were you there?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This line of questioning doesn't go towards any objection.
Well, you acknowledged that he had assisted in digging up a dog, at least a dog and a cat. He had mentioned pets. I think you ought to be able to inquire as to whether or not he went through the entire pet cemetery or not.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Detective Hermosillo, you can answer the question. Did you dig up the whole pet cemetery?
I personally did not. We were instructed to do different tasks. So when we started on one task, we would complete it and then we would move to something else. But there were several ERT members that were on scene that may have done that.
That may have done that, or did you observe anybody dig up the entire pet cemetery?
Again, Your Honor, this goes to a factual issue, not a legal objection.
Mr. Pryor, it appears that you're doing a cross-examination here. Which objection are you trying to lay foundation for?
Judge, I'll get the information through cross-examination. Let's move on.
Thank you. Why don't we take a brief recess? It is almost 10:30. We'll take a 15-minute recess and then we'll go back on the record at 11:15, so 10:45.
All right.
Wow. Well, that's looks like the first half of this. I don't know if they're going to keep this stream live. I would assume they're just going to keep this stream live right with the court seal just because of the 15-minute recess. This is actually going a lot more in depth than I even would have thought, and the defense doesn't have to, they're not giving us a lot of info as far as they're just kind of laying out things that we already knew, right? Like they got all the way to this hour and 14-minute mark to get to, hey, we found bodies of the people we've been looking for on this dude's property. That last little bit about the pet cemetery, it will be interesting to see the or not the co-conspirator, but the cross-examination about the pet cemetery. It's real. The attorney, the defense attorney, doesn't have to put up his defense right now. He's trying to get information. And the biggest information he's trying to get is about these officers. Okay. It's not necessarily about the evidence. It's not necessarily about, getting justice, finding loopholes. He's actually, the defense right now is trying to see what he can get away with as far as with the witnesses. And once he's starting to fill out the witnesses, because when it comes to trial, his cross examinations, his objections will come a lot quicker with a lot more argument. But right now, it's almost like he's just trying to fill out the witnesses. That last little bit was even, in my opinion, he's trying to question the witness. Did you dig up the pets or did you not dig up the pets? Did you dig up one pet, two pets? How many pets? Did you dig up all the pets? Who gives a shit about the pets? Who gives a shit about the pets? You dumbass lawyer, right? That's what we all want to say. But the truth is, he's trying to go after something without going after, did you dig up the bodies? He said because the attorney, or because the cop was saying, I observed. And then he was like, oh, you were talking about the pets for a second. Let me dig with this cop here and question him. And it is very uncomfortable for cops. First of all, I want you to understand something. It is very uncomfortable for cops to answer questions. Cops are not normally the ones who answer questions. This is why it's so important that if you ever get committed, or if you ever get accused of a crime and the only accuser is a cop, it is so important that you go to trial, because a lot of you have even made statements on here. Why does that cop look so scared? Right? Why does that witness look scared? It is so uncomfortable for cops to get asked questions. They hate it. They hate it. And when they get put on the stand in a courtroom where they not only have to answer questions, they really have to think about what's coming out of their mouth, because they're so used to lying. They're so used to saying whatever they need to say to get people to tell them what they want, that they're not used to answering questions. And so this officer, in my opinion, was studied up. He was ready. When dates were asked of him, he was able to recite the date immediately. So I thought the officer did a great job as far as answering questions with detail on dates, times, things like that, which are real important, because if he answers the correct dates and times, it looks so more accurate for a jury. It looks so much more accurate for as it makes you look like a better witness, right? It makes you look more because you have dates and times and all that stuff. So I thought the cop did a great job, even with the little jabs from the defense attorney. But it had to have been, yeah, people are saying, imagine being the people who found, man alive. Can you, I can't. I have to kind of separate myself when I think about this, because when I start thinking about that, I just don't want to, I'll go into a rant that will take me down a hole I don't want to go. And that's the thing, when you start talking about children, and when he starts describing the size and the sod that stood out, and then he describes Chad staring off into the direction, looking into the direction into where they would end up finding the kids. I found it very interesting that it didn't seem like at this point, I may have missed. I was listening with you guys, but I still may have missed it. I was watching chat. It didn't seem like they gave any. Well, they talked about tips coming in, but they didn't give any specific that said, hey, a tip came in that said, go dig in the backyard at this certain point. From what I'm understanding from this cop, it was the cadaver dogs who alerted them, and maybe it was Chad who pointed them in the direction of that area, but it didn't sound like there was any. It doesn't mean that there wasn't. First of all, I'm saying this because I want you to understand that, like, when they were dropping, and it doesn't mean that there's not going to be a witness later that said, that were called in and said, hey, you guys need to dig out there in this certain little spot. But remember when all the rumors were flying around and people were saying, oh, the tip came in from a neighbor. I was saying, damn, Lori Vallow must have screamed bloody murder or must have screamed something from the cell, because they have already been out here and they didn't even talk about the first time they were out there. So why they were out there at that specific day and time and were searching, it didn't sound like they specifically gave a reason why they decided to do it this day, why they showed up this day to search. This, with this kind of vigor, and the fact that they had dogs, I don't even remember. I think there was some reports that there were dogs, but we didn't see any dogs from the video footage. Again, we only saw the helicopter fly around, and then there were a few people on the ground after the fact. Tyson was there a day after, or I think it was the day after, or a couple of days after, but it was the dogs. The pooch, man's best friend, is what got old Chad Daybell, it sounded like. So for at least the way they described it here, because it was the dogs and this team who became interested in this specific spot. Also, the sod, the grass was different. So, it sounds like there were contributing factors that pinpointed them to that exact location. And we know that they've talked about the cell phone data pinpointing Alex there in that area. We know that they've talked about, so they had some ideas, but this officer made it sound like, hey, the dogs came, boom, the dogs targeted, boom, the dogs did and they dug. And so it'll be interesting to see if another officer, or if a specific officer from those search teams that showed up, not this detective, but from those specific search teams, if they had information that pointed him to I mean, the property's not that big, so with a cadaver dog, in an hour, you can run that whole property, and if the dog doesn't alert on anything, then you're almost like, hey, it's only so big, there's only so many places, right? And so it's interesting that they went, it was later, because the rumor was that there were dogs on that property prior to this search, that they had looked around that property before. And the news has reported, the East Idaho news guy Nate had reported that they had dogs there prior, and there was rumored to be dogs there prior to this search. So it's interesting that the dogs targeted, I don't know if it was different dogs, if it was, it's just interesting the way they got to that patch of little grass. In my opinion, it doesn't have to be rocket science. If they have a warrant for the property and there is a spot in the field that looks like it's different than the rest, I would say, hey, start there. The worst you're going to do is dig up a few feet and not find anything. But he said as soon as they begin to dig, they could smell the decomposing body. And so, golly, I can't imagine. I'm sure there'll be another cop that'll come up and there'll be some answers about, or maybe there might be some questions about why this specific time they decided to run these warrants and stuff. I better check my judges. We're still live with them on the. I found it interesting that the judge is building his YouTube. He's building his YouTube page off this case. Like, I would have thought that the state of Idaho, like the court system, maybe would have their own YouTube channel that they would broadcast cases from. But this judge is broadcasting. I'm getting the feed straight from his YouTube channel. Since the cop definitely has to get back on the stand because he hasn't been cross-examined yet. We do know that there'll be cross-examination coming, hopefully about the pet cemetery a little bit more. But the Karen says the judge is hot. Uh-oh. The judge has got his own YouTube channel. And did you subscribe, Karen, to the judge's YouTube channel? How long were the bodies there? Well, they said the last time anyone known to see Tylee was in September. I can't remember the days. I don't remember the date that they said early on that Alex was at that back property. Alex's cell phone, I should say, was back at that property. I found it interesting that they talked about co-conspirators, and Alex isn't officially named as a co-conspirator, but they said named and unnamed, and the attorney tried to X out some of Alex's testimony based on the fact that he's a dead guy, but the Alex is Lori Vallow's brother. Alex died of natural causes, quote unquote, to a woman at a woman's house that he had just married, which that woman alone has had like 5 husbands. They were like assassins together, I think, and she got the slip on him. Mr. Smith, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and Mrs. Smith got the slip on Alex. Oh, Chad's got a little. He does have a little dope boy in him. I'll admit. I bet he's having a hard time in jail. I bet the old boys are giving him a once over. He looks like a lost little puppy dog. Puppy dog Chad. The old puppy dog Chad. Right now, I bet this little stream is being streamed on YouTube's across the platform. I thought about that earlier. I was like, we're all streaming the same hearing to different channels just to communicate with a small group of people who chose to watch Dad with a Phone on Facebook. So thanks for watching here, because you could actually go watch this at a number of places on YouTube, but you're here with us, so thank you. Oh, Chad in his portal. That boy, I'm just trying to make sure we're still playing here, because They got us the Great Seal of the state of Idaho. We will not let you miss. I actually started, I think, about 5 or 10 minutes late. Yep, I just wanted to refresh the old feed, make sure we were still up to date with the judge here. Yeah, Chad looks pretty, he does look pretty emotionless, I guess is the best way to put it. He does not have, except for that little, I do wish the camera operator or whoever's directing this, if you're not listening to Dad with the phone, but I would give you a tip that show a little bit more of old Daybell boy. Yeah, let's see a little bit more of old cowboy. All right, we're gonna get this show on the road now. Doughboy's back. Doughboy is back.
Thank you. Good to see you.
We'll go back on the record here in CR 2220-755, State of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. Court took a brief recess. It's now 11:15. The witness, Detective Hermosillo, is still on the witness stand, still under oath. We're still continuing with direct examination. Mr. Wood, you may continue to inquire.
Thank you. Detective Hermosillo. We were discussing your observations of the ERT team in an area that you've identified as a pet cemetery, correct?
That's correct.
For purposes of clarity of the record, I'm going to kind of skip back to a couple things. You've described Mr. Daybell's house as being in Fremont County, correct?
Yes,
And just for purposes of the record, that is Fremont County in the state of Idaho, correct?
correct.
You described Lori Vallow's apartment complex as being in Madison County.
Correct.
And again, for purposes of clarity of the record, that's Madison County in the state of Idaho.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, let's get back to where we were. You have testified that you observed the ERT team, and I guess that's redundant. I should just say ERT. The T stands for team. You observed ERT uncover the remains of what you believe to be a dog and a cat.
Correct.
What did you further, do you recall approximately what time of day that was? And yeah, what time of day was that?
It was early afternoon. I'd guess 1.
Okay. While you were in that area, did you have a chance to further observe ERT excavate that area you referred to as the pet cemetery?
Yes.
Okay. What did you observe?
I had been away from that area, but when I returned to that area, they had already dug down and located what appeared to be a mass of burnt flesh and charred bone.
Okay. Do you recall approximately how deep down that was?
I don't recall how deep it was.
Okay. Did you observe ERT take that mass out of the ground?
Yes, I did.
Okay. This search that commenced on June 9th, did it finish on June 9th?
No.
Did it continue on to June 10th?
Yes.
Okay. When the search ended on June 9th, was the residence of Chad Daybell secured?
Yes, it was.
And do you recall, did you observe if security guards were placed there?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about June 10th. Did you observe that location? Let's go back to that cemetery location again. Did you observe any excavation being done on June 10th?
Yes, I did.
What did you observe?
ERT had gone back to the same spot where there was a mass of burnt flesh and bone, and began excavating around that the best they could.
Okay. And what happened?
They were ultimately able to dig completely around the entire mass to reveal what they were digging up.
Okay. And did they remove, again, that mass from that area?
Yes, they did.
Did you see what they did with it?
Yes.
What did they do with it?
They put it in a bag and placed it in the back of the coroner's vehicle.
Okay. Were there any other identifying features of that in that area or as part of that mass that drew your attention?
Yes, there was.
What was it?
There was a melted green bucket that it appeared that the burnt flesh had been placed in. Under the bucket was a partial human skull.
And was that bucket and what you've just described as a partial human skull, were those also, did you observe what was done with those?
Yes.
What was done with those?
They were also placed into a bag and placed in the coroner's vehicle.
Okay. And do you remember approximately what time those items were placed in the coroner's vehicle, approximately?
Afternoon, maybe 3 or 4-ish.
Okay. For the purposes of your investigation, what else did you do on June 10th?
I followed the Fremont County coroner, Fremont County Detective Vince Kaikamanu and Ron Ball. We went to Boise to the Ada County Coroner's Office with the remains that were recovered that day.
Okay. Did you, before you left to go to Boise, did you have an opportunity to go to Madison Memorial Hospital in
Yes.
Rexford?
Yes.
And what did you do there?
Recovered the remains found from the first day as well.
Okay. And you observed what you recognize as those same remains?
That's correct.
Okay. Detective, I'm going to call your attention to June 11th. What did you do in furtherance of your investigation that day?
We were at the Ada County Coroner's Office.
Okay, and let me stop you real quick. About what time did you get there?
We arrived there on June 10th.
Okay.
That day on June 11th, we got there in the morning.
And let's go back to June 10th really quick. When you arrived in Boise, what was the first thing you did there?
We went to the Ada County Coroner's Office.
Okay. Do you remember approximately what time you got there?
Evening.
Okay. All right. And now back to June 11th. Approximately what time did you return to the coroner's office?
Early morning.
Okay. Detective, once you arrived on June 11th, what did you do in furtherance of your investigation?
Observed the autopsies of those remains that were recovered.
Okay. Now, you've discussed two separate, I'll at this point call them items of interest. Did you recognize those items of interest again in the coroner's office?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And do you know if those items had been secured there the night before?
They had been.
Okay. Once you arrived in the autopsy room, what was the first thing you observed?
The first thing I observed was the black bag that was covered in duct tape that had been removed from the area underneath the tree by the pond, was placed on the table.
Okay, and you recognize that as the same black bag.
Yes,
How did you recognize that?
the duct tape and the black plastic that had still had dirt all over it.
What did you observe? Who was with you?
The medical examiner was in the room, Lieutenant Ron Ball, Detective Vince Kai Kamanu, and the Fremont County Coroner, Brenda Dye.
Was there a medical examiner there?
Yes,
Do you know who he was?
Garth Warren.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Judge,
Garth Warren.
And you've testified you observed those proceedings,
Yes.
correct? Once that bag was, as you testified, moved to the table, what did you observe was done with it?
The ME grabbed a small sharp instrument and cut down the middle of the black plastic.
And what did you observe?
I observed a small child in red pajamas, red pajama shirt, red pajama pants, black socks that had the word Skechers in orange across the toes. I also observed a light and blue blanket that had been placed on top of him.
Okay. Detective, were there, when you observed what you perceived to be a child, was there anything that drew your attention?
Yes.
Can describe can you describe for the court what drew your attention?
The amount of duct tape that was covering the body.
Okay. Where was that duct tape located?
On the head, arms, and feet.
Okay. Let's talk about the head area. When you looked at the head, what did you observe there?
The head had a white plastic bag over the top of it. It appeared to be a normal trash bag, had a red drawstring. It appeared to be the expandable type of trash bag with the waffle style pattern on top of the head.
Okay. And you had mentioned duct tape there. Where did you observe the duct tape?
There was duct tape that was tightly wrapped around this way, tightly from his chin to his forehead area. Several layers of duct tape tightly wrapped.
Okay. What did you observe the medical examiner and his team do with that material?
They ended up using a small sharp instrument and cut down the middle of it to expose what was underneath.
Okay, and when they exposed underneath, what did you observe?
An additional piece of duct tape that was stretched from jawline to jawline across the mouth.
Okay, and when you say across the mouth, at this point, were you looking at this child's face?
I was.
Okay. As you looked at this child's face, did you recognize this child?
Yes, I did.
How did you recognize this child?
From the hundreds of photographs and video I've seen over the last 8 months, I recognize that to be the same little boy that was laying on the table,
Okay, and can you, who was that little boy?
Joshua Vallow.
Were there any features that helped you recognize him?
Yes.
What were they?
He had the same style haircut that he had in the videos that I had seen and the photographs I had seen just prior to my welfare check with him in September, the last photograph I had seen on September 22nd. And that was shaved on the sides and longer on top.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other items of, were there any other items of interest to you on that body?
Yes.
Can you just, what were they?
His hands were folded about chest high,
Detective, can you lift that a little bit higher so that we can see?
folded like this, chest high. He had duct tape continuously wrapped from elbow all the way around his arms, over his hands, all the way to his right elbow. Several layers of duct tape that were tightly wrapped. And the best way I can describe it is he had a ball of duct tape over where his hands would be.
Okay. Was that duct tape removed?
Yes, it was.
And what did you observe after that?
His wrists were also bound with another layer of duct tape.
Okay. After that, was there anything else that caught your attention about the way this child was found?
Yes, I noticed that his ankles were also bound with duct tape as well.
Okay. After you observed that, did you observe the autopsy of that child?
I did.
Okay. Detective, upon the conclusion of that autopsy, did you witness another examination that day?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember approximately when that examination started?
In the afternoon.
Okay. What did you observe in that second examination?
I observed the same melted green bucket with the charred flesh and charred bone that was located on Mr. Daybell's property that was now sitting on the table in the medical examiner's office.
Okay, thank you. Your Honor, the state has no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Cross-examination, Mr. Pryor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer, I'd like to go back to the initial contact with Mr. Daybell.
Mr. Pryor, will you pull that microphone closer to your mouth?
I apologize, Judge.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, officer?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the initial contact with Mr. Daybell. And again, in November, when was that date, sir?
The initial contact with Mr. Daybell was on the 26th of November, 2019.
At approximately what time, officer?
Early morning hours, around 9, I would say.
Okay, was that contact recorded?
It was not.
Is there a reason why you didn't record that contact?
It's not common practice for detectives to carry body cams.
Is it common practice for detectives to record conversations with witnesses when you interview them?
It is.
Can you understand why it's important that an interview with a witness is recorded?
Yes.
And it's important to record a witness or an interview with a witness so that we get the factual statements made by people recorded accurately. Would you agree with that?
I would.
And it's important that when we make statements and we make representations regarding statements that people make and observations, that they're accurate observations, right?
That's correct.
And one of the best ways to do that is to record those observations. Would you agree with me?
I would.
Okay. This was somewhat of an important case, was it not?
Not at that time. It was just a welfare check.
Okay. And then this welfare check turned into an interview with Mr. Cox and Mr. Daybell, however, correct?
Correct.
At any time, did you think that maybe you should have recorded this?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you record any of the other interviews with any of the other witnesses throughout your investigation?
I did.
And whose interviews have you recorded?
Melanie Boudreau's interview.
Then let's stop there. How many times did you talk with Melanie Boudreau?
Objection, this exceeds the scope of the direct.
Mr. Pryor, before we go any further, I'm hearing a shudder. Can the media please turn off the shudder sound? It's impeding my ability to hear the attorneys from both the state and the defense. Mr. Pryor, let me go back there. Mr. Wood, the objection is based upon exceeding the scope of the direct. Mr. Pryor, I'll let you respond to that objection.
Well, Judge, throughout his testimony, he made at least a couple of references to interviewing other members of the family and having conversations with them about various facts in this as part of his testimony with Mr. Wood. Quite honestly, if he's talking as Mr. Boudreau is one of those folks that he gained information from, one, I'm going to get into what information did he gather from them, and two, whether or not that's been memorialized in the form of a recording. So I think it is relevant, and I think quite honestly, it's permissible inquiry in this particular case.
At this point, Your Honor, he's asking for hearsay information, and again, he's way outside the scope of what Detective Hermosillo testified to.
Mr. Pryor, as it pertains, I think there were a couple questions as to a search of an apartment that belonged to Miss Boudreau. I think that there was some brief questioning about questions of family members, but as far as the depth of those conversations, your objection was that they were hearsay. I agree with Mr. Wood, they are hearsay. Tell me where you're desiring to go. If you're just laying some foundation or getting some information about the communication, when it happened, etc., I think that that's completely relevant and it's completely within the scope. If it's beyond that, tell me what your argument is.
Well, Judge, quite honestly, I'm not necessarily seeking the exact information that those particular witnesses provided to this officer. What I'm trying to seek is a timeline as to exactly who he spoke to and when, and where he gathered this information. And as part of seeking that information as to who he spoke to, when he spoke to as part of this case, I would like to know whether or not that's a recorded conversation. So I am afforded the opportunity to look at what this officer testifies to today and compare it to what those recordings are. And I think it's important that I be afforded that opportunity. And as part of this, it's a preliminary hearing. Preliminarily, I would like to know whether or not this officer recorded the conversations.
With that, I will allow the questions pertaining to who he spoke to and when he spoke to them, whether or not they were recorded. But as far as the substance of those conversations, I will sustain the objection that Mr. Wood has raised as far as hearsay.
All right. You spoke with Melanie Boudreau, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And how many times did you speak with her?
One time.
And when was that, sir?
December 3rd, 2019.
Was that as part of the investigation of the welfare check?
Yes, it was.
Okay, was there any other inquiry in there as to, were you at that point, had this moved into an area of trying to decide whether there had been any foul play with JJ or Tylee?
I was asking Miss Boudreau how we could get a hold of Mr. Daybell or Lori Vallow.
Okay, and that's to inquire as to the whereabouts of JJ at that time?
That is correct.
What about Tylee? Had it moved into that as well?
I did ask about Tylee.
Okay, at this,
Your Honor, I'm going to object again. He's now asking for information from those interviews. It has nothing to do with the scope of the direct examination.
I'm not asking for information from Ms. Boudreau. I'm asking what this officer did as part of his investigation. Judge, we've just spent 2 hours listening to this officer talk about all of the steps in detail that he's done as part of his investigation. I think quite honestly, I ought to be able to ask some very basic questions about what witnesses he interviewed as part of that investigation. I can't even fathom how that's not allowable inquiry. And I think quite honestly, I don't know if Mr. Wood doesn't want to give me the information, or if this officer doesn't want to give me the information, but clearly I ought to be allowed to inquire as to what this officer did as part of his investigation.
As it pertains to the inquiry of whether or not Tylee Ryan was discussed, I'll allow that question. I'll have the officer answer that question. The deeper substance of that conversation, I agree, is beyond the scope.
Was part of your inquiry to discuss Tylee as well?
Yes, it was.
So this had gone beyond the welfare check of JJ. It had gone to, we're trying to find out if there's any sort of issues regarding JJ and Tylee at this point. Is that correct?
We're trying to find their whereabouts.
Okay. And at that point, were you concerned about their whereabouts in
Yes,
December?
we were. Yes, we were.
Were you significantly concerned about their whereabouts in December?
Yes, we were.
Okay. Was that conversation with Melanie Boudreaux, was that a recorded conversation?
It was.
Okay. And you provided that to the prosecuting attorney,
Yes.
as well as a statement of your complete interview with Judge, I heard a noise, I'm sorry.
I think it was someone's chair.
Okay, as well as a complete dissertation of what that interview involved. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So in December, it was important that you record that conversation. What other family members did you discuss the case with? Let's try Garth. Did you talk to Garth?
I didn't personally talk to Garth.
You did not?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did you talk to Emma?
I did not personally talk to Emma.
Did you talk to Melanie Gibbs?
I did talk to Melanie Gibb.
You did?
Yes.
How many times?
By what date, sir?
How about from the time you started investigating this in November until yesterday?
Your Honor, this is far beyond the scope of the direct. A preliminary hearing, as the case law states, it's in no sense a trial. Not a trial. It does not require the same formality and precision observed at a trial. The state is not required to put on every bit of evidence it has. And the scope of the cross-examination should be limited to the direct. At this point, defense is using this as a fishing expedition to try and find out everything that they may want to know that is not the subject of this preliminary hearing. This is a probable cause hearing. That's why we're here. It's not a hearing for the defense to ask every question they may want to ask.
And Judge, when a prosecuting attorney elects to spend 2 hours with a witness going into what I call significant detail about every aspect of this case, at that point, this prosecuting attorney opened the door to allowing me to inquire about all of this stuff. Quite honestly, he doesn't get it both ways. He doesn't get to say, I'm going to have this officer talk in great detail about every facet of this case from the beginning of his investigation through the end, all the way to the autopsy, and say, oh, Mr. Pryor, I'm now going to object to you inquiring and seeking information about the steps that were taken as part of this investigation from beginning to end. He doesn't get it both ways. It works so that I get a fair opportunity to inquire of this officer. I'm not asking of substance of those witnesses. I understand, and I understand completely the hearsay rules. But quite honestly, Judge, I'm dumbfounded by the fact that he's objecting, because I'm trying to find out who this officer spoke to and whether or not those questions and those conversations were recorded. This is not delving into specifics about each of the individual witnesses. I clearly should be permitted to go down this road.
All right, the court's going to take a brief recess here. I'm going to look at one thing that I have a question about. We're going to take 5 minutes, and then we'll go back on the record and proceed with the cross.
Well, isn't this just an interesting kickoff to a preliminary hearing? Look, I ain't gonna take away from the defense attorney asking questions of witnesses. So many times these defense attorneys just sit right back and don't do anything. This guy is definitely grandstanding for the cameras. He's definitely digging in to try to get more info. But you do have to understand the cop did just explain in detail how they discovered, how they found, how they got to these bodies. But I'm actually in rather surprised. We're 2 hours in, cross-examination of the first witness just started, and now we're already in a recess because objection after objection after objection. And it's making for some good court TV for sure. This is going to be a very tedious long the trial itself. This is the preliminary hearing. They really only have to show that's why I was real surprised at how in detailed this cop went to get to probable cause for the arrest. Remember, this is just a magistrate court. Um this isn't the district court that this will be tried in. This is just a magistrate court that is trying to figure out if this guy should even be in jail right now. Right? This is the preliminary hearing, and they're getting after it. They are getting after it. This is more than you would normally see in a preliminary hearing. I don't know if it's because of the high profile, really complicated case this is. This is a real complicated. It was a super complicated case until they found the bodies, but now, in my opinion, it is pretty open and shut. But this is going to be a tedious court case to follow and watch. Thanks for joining Dad with a Phone right now. Hey, this is a perfect opportunity if you're on Facebook to share this in your favorite true crime Facebook group, or share it on your page. Hit the share button. We are 2 hours in. We are only one witness in. We are only one witness into a preliminary hearing, which 2 hours, I guesstimated between 2 and 4 hours. This is definitely going to be on the longer end. It's going to be the over. This very well could go, if they're calling more witnesses, okay, after this cross-examination, if they're going to call more witnesses, another cop, another specialist, if they're going to call someone to talk about, you know, whatever, this is going to go 4 hours. If this is the only witness, I could see another hour and a half. I could still see 4 hours going. It's going to be interesting how the judge lets this defense attorney proceed, because we did just hear a lengthy description of the investigation, but the prosecutors are objecting at every turn that they can to try to stop the cop from giving out more information. They don't want, like I said, they don't want all their evidence to come forward. Did you find fingerprints on the duct tape? Did you find, all these little questions that could be asked? It's still one of those things. A preliminary hearing can go one of two ways, because this case has now made national news, international news, people from around the world are watching. They're going to be, there's going to be, I think, a little bit extra. I think they're going to throw icing on everything. Oh, well, where we would have just talked about this and this in the preliminary hearing, we're going to go a little bit more in detail. We're going to take a little bit more, you didn't really have to describe all the things that you pulled out of, digging on his property. You really wouldn't have to do all that. They did that. And it's interesting now that cross-examination's coming in. He can barely get a question out without an objection. So come on, cameraman, get on it.
We'll go back on the record. CR 2220-755, State versus Daybell. Court took a brief recess. For the recess, there was an objection made by the state. That objection was based upon going beyond the scope of direct examination of Detective Hermosillo. Mr. Pryor responded with the argument that he was inquiring into facts of the investigation. The court initially overruled the objection and stated that I would allow the questions pertaining to who was spoken to, whether that conversation was recorded, when the conversation took place in the course of the investigation. I will stand by my ruling that I will allow Mr. Pryor to continue to inquire of the witness as to that state of the investigation. When it comes to the substance of those interviews or inquiries of the witnesses and or family, I'm going to sustain Mr. Robb's objection going forward that those will be unallowed or disallowed based upon hearsay. I think there's also a scope of the direct that would also come into play at that point. So Mr. Pryor, if you'd like to proceed with the questioning of Mr. or Detective Hermosillo on cross, you may do so.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, when we were on the subject of Melanie Gibb, you spoke with her as well, is that correct?
That's correct.
Was that a recorded conversation?
I think one of them, the last one was.
Well,
When I spoke with her, we were on the phone. She was in Arizona and I was on a cell phone.
did you ever have the occasion? Now, my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, officer, my notes seem to reflect that you said you spoke with Melanie Gibb once. Was I incorrect in my notes?
No, I had spoken with her once in person.
Oh, once in person, okay.
And then on the phone the rest of the times.
Okay, and the date that you spoke to her in person, where was that location?
That was in Salt Lake City,
And the date of
or
that?
Provo, I believe, Provo.
And that discussion in Salt Lake City was on what date, sir?
I don't recall the date.
Okay, all right. Now, you said it was Salt Lake City, it was Provo, was it not?
It was Provo area, yeah.
Provo area, not North Salt Lake City, correct? And as part of that discussion, you drove down to Salt Lake City to interview her, is that correct?
That's correct.
And accompanying you on that trip was Lieutenant Ball, is that correct?
That's correct.
And also accompanying you on that trip was Mr. Wood, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And do you have any recollection of during that one-to-one face-to-face interview between you, Mr. Wood, Lieutenant Ball, and yourself, and Melanie Gibb, was that recorded at any time?
I believe Lieutenant Ball had recorded that conversation.
You believe or you know?
I believe he recorded the conversation.
You did not record it?
No, sir.
Who was the head investigator of this investigation at this point?
I was the lead investigator, but he was the supervisor on scene.
Okay, and as the lead investigator, you chose not to record that conversation, is that correct?
I did not record that conversation.
And as the lead investigator, you chose not to record that conversation. That was an affirmative decision not to record the conversation.
Objection asked and answered.
I didn't get the
Sustained.
question.
You can move on, Mr. Pryor.
And then there was a phone conversation with Ms. Gibb, is that correct?
That is correct.
When was that?
That was in December sometime.
Is there a reason you don't know the specific dates? In a number of instances here, we've had occasions where you seem to suggest the month, but you don't know the specific date. Is there a reason behind that?
Those weren't super important dates to me. I interviewed a lot of people throughout the last 8 months.
Okay, and as a preparation for this hearing, did you review your reports and your supplements as part of your preparation to testify today?
I did.
Okay. And in spite of reading that supplement and refreshing your recollection, you still don't remember the specific dates and times?
Sir, forgive me, I can't remember every single word for an 8-month investigation on
Right,
dates and times.
And with all due respect to you, sir, I'm not questioning your integrity and I'm not questioning your honesty. But quite honestly, there's a lot of information here, is there not?
There is,
And there's a lot of things that are said as part of this investigation, is there not?
there is.
Okay. And I'd like to go back to the time on November 27th, I believe, or maybe was it 26th? I'm sorry, it's November 26th. And even myself, I get dates wrong. But on November 26th, when you interviewed Mr. Daybell, you said that Mr. Daybell said he didn't know Lori Vallow very well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It's not recorded. Is that correct? Is it possible that he said, I know her? And you said, how well do you know her? And he responded, well, I don't know her.
Objection, hearsay.
I'm asking a question as to whether this is possible he said this. And if he's going down the road of hearsay, Judge, this has already been ruled on.
Your Honor, it calls for hearsay.
I'm going to overrule the objection. Mr. Pryor, you may continue with the question. I believe the question was, is it possible?
Right.
I'll
Is it
allow that
possible
question.
that Mr. Daybell said, I don't know her as well as Alex?
No, that's not what I remember.
Okay. But you've already acknowledged that your recollection and the number of facts may not be completely accurate. Is that correct?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Do you have a clear recollection of every statement made by every single witness in this case, sir?
Objection, argumentative.
I'll allow the question.
Do you have a clear recollection of every statement of every witness made in this case, sir?
No,
Do you have a clear recollection of every date and the substance and time of every date as part of your investigation in this case?
Objection, relevance.
Mr. Pryor,
It goes to his recollection, it goes to bias, Judge.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You may answer the question, Mr. Detective Hermosillo.
would you ask it again, please?
Just the recollection of every date and time in this case as part of your investigation.
No, I don't.
And you would agree with me that it's possible that Mr. Daybell said that I don't know her as well.
Objection,
as
asked and
Alex does,
answered.
sir.
Mr. Pryor, there's an objection as to asked and answered.
Judge, I laid the foundation and went down the same road, but the question is slightly different. Is it possible that you made a mistake about whether or not Mr. Daybell stated what you claimed he stated?
Mr. Wood,
Your Honor, at this point, defense is clearly trying to get in a statement of his own client. That's hearsay. There's no exception for it. If he wants to get in Mr. Daybell's testimony, he can put Mr. Daybell on the stand.
I'm going to sustain the objection on the ground that it's been asked and answered. I think it was asked the exact same way. I don't think he answered it in the way that you wanted him to answer it, but it has been asked and answered. Let's move on.
Now, officer, your testimony originally was that the last time that they saw JJ was the 22nd of September.
Objection, that's vague reference to they, doesn't state who that is.
So the objection is to foundation.
Yes,
Mr. Pryor, do you want to lay a little bit more foundation before engaging in a conversation on that date?
As part of your investigation, you were able to ascertain a date based on reviewing pictures and evidence of when you believe the last time JJ Vallow was seen. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And as part of your testimony to today, you said you believe that the last day was the 22nd of September. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, as part of your investigation, did you contact JJ's school?
Yes, we did.
And as part of your investigation, were you able to ascertain the last day that the school had him registered and attending school?
Yes,
And that was the September 23rd, was it not?
that is not correct.
Would it surprise you to learn that there are statements about JJ Vallow attending school on the 23rd?
Initially, we talked to the school and we had an unexcused absence on the 23rd, but an excused absence on the 24th. So in the initial part of the investigation, we believe that JJ may have gone to school on the 23rd, but later learned that was not the case.
And as part of your investigation into that issue, did you record that conversation with any of the officials?
I did not personally speak to the school.
Do you know who spoke to the school?
Detective Dave Hope.
Now, you talked and made reference to hundreds of pictures and videos. Do you remember saying that?
That is correct.
Did you provide those hundreds of pictures and videos to the prosecuting attorney?
I assumed that he had gotten the photographs that we have gotten.
Okay, but that wasn't the question. The question is you made mention of reviewing hundreds of photos and hundreds of videos. Okay.
Through-
Objection, I think he's misstating the witness's earlier testimony.
Mr. Pryor, will you repeat the question? And Mr. Wood, if you believe he is misstating the witness's testimony, I'll allow you to make the objection again.
Judge, the witness had previously said that as part of his investigation, he looked at hundreds of videos and pictures. I'm inquiring as to whether or not all of those videos, those hundreds of videos and hundreds of pictures have been provided to Mr. Wood as part of this case.
I'll allow the question. I'll direct the witness to answer.
During the course of the investigation, there have been numerous people that had played YouTube videos, friends that had uploaded things to the internet, things of that nature, which we saw Tylee or JJ on. The videos and photographs that we had obtained, the prosecutor has copies of.
Okay. But then other videos that you've used as part of your investigation that were on YouTube. And when you're talking about these videos, you're talking about people in the community who have posted videos and audio, who have, this has drawn a significant amount of local attention. Would you agree with me?
I would agree.
And there's been a significant amount of people posting videos, posting pictures, posting audio in Fremont and Madison County. Would you agree with that, sir?
Yes.
Now, as part of your search warrant, initially to go into the, and there were 3 apartments, if my recollection is correct, and please correct me if I make a mistake. There were 3 apartments that you sought and obtained a search warrant for, is that correct?
That's correct.
And the date that you sought that search warrant was when, sir?
November 27th,
Okay.
2019.
And the purpose of that search warrant was to search to determine whether or not Joshua J. Vallow was present in any of those apartments. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was the purpose of that search warrant to obtain information and gather evidence in other regards?
No,
The sole purpose was to go in there to look and see if there was a human person in any of those units. Is that correct?
we were looking for any person in those units and to see if we can find out the whereabouts of JJ.
Okay. Was it part of that? Did that search warrant scope include the ability to obtain and take evidence and information to help support you in a later time?
Yes, it did.
Now, when you searched Alex's apartment, and that was 107, is that right?
Alex was staying in 175. That's where his belongings were.
In 175?
Yes.
And who was the person who owned 175 or rented 175, excuse me?
On the rental agreement, I believe it was Alex Cox that was on 175,
Okay, and what number was Lori Vallow's?
107.
And you also went into 174, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and Melanie Boudreaux's was what?
174.
If I could have just a moment, Judge.
You may.
Mr. Pryor, Mr. Pryor, if you do not want that to be on the record, you need to push that button right in front of the microphone there, so that green light is not on while you're talking.
If you hold it, you need to hold it down. Thank you.
So in 175, was there any indication that Alex Cox had any belongings in there whatsoever of any kind?
In 175,
Yes.
yes,
Were there any indications that Alex Cox had belongings in 107?
107 was vacant.
Was there any indication that Lori Vallow had ever resided in 175?
Yes,
Okay, do you have a length of time as to how long she was in 175?
no,
Are you of the opinion that Lori Vallow and Alex Cox were living together in unit 175 at some time?
Objection calls for speculation.
Do you have any personal information as part of your investigation that Lori Vallow and Alex Cox were residing together in unit 175?
I have no information that they lived there at the same time.
Okay. They may have lived there at different times in that unit. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting when we did the surveillance, that's where Lori Vallow was residing, and we had
She was
located
residing where?
in 175.
Okay. All right. And we're going to get to the surveillance. So you talked about that if you may. So at any point, as part of your surveillance, did you see her residing in 107?
No,
As part of your surveillance, was there a recording of any of the surveillance tapes?
no,
Did you record anything?
no.
How many hours would you suggest you did in surveillance of the Vallow apartment 175?
Oh, 15, 20 hours worth, maybe.
Okay. You talked about phone records initially in regards to the November 27th inquiry. Whose phone records specifically were you looking at as part of your initial investigation?
Lori Vallow's and Chad Daybell's.
Did you inquire as to Alex Cox's phone records?
I believe we did. I'm not sure if it was on the 27th or not.
All right. Did you inquire as to when Lori Vallow and Alex Cox both moved here together? Approximately what date?
Yes,
When was that?
1st of September.
And you made some reference to the relationship between Lori and Alex. Do you have specific information that would suggest they had a very close relationship?
Yes.
And what information is that, officer?
Information we had obtained through Gilbert, Arizona, through their investigation.
And when Lori Vallow chose to move here on the 1st of September, Alex Cox at the same time moved here as well, did he not?
He did.
Okay. And in fact, they lived together for a portion of the time, did they not?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Is it possible that they did live together?
Objection, Your Honor. I fail to see how this is relevant.
There's
I'll
been an
move on.
objection as to relevance.
Judge, I think I'm just going to move on. I think
Okay.
I can inquire in another manner about this evidence through another witness. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to turn our attention now to the picture or the demonstrative evidence, and I believe it's exhibit number 10. And if you would be so kind again to get the pointer out and point where Mr. Daybell's vehicle was parked.
So the court record is clear. Exhibit number 10 has remained up on an easel for the entire time on cross-examination. And the inquiry is about exhibit 10 that still exists on the easel. Go
Now,
ahead.
how was the car parked in the driveway, officer?
It was backed into the driveway facing west.
Okay. So the car was backed in. Was it all the way to the garage or was it partially in the driveway?
Sir, if you look at, this was taken that morning,
Okay.
so that's exactly where he was parked that morning when he was sitting in the vehicle.
Well,
Just
I
to-
appreciate you pointing that out to me. What I would like you to do is verbalize how far close to the garage was the car in relation to the garage.
10 feet.
So 10 feet from the door of the garage towards the street, is that correct?
Rough guess, yes.
And Judge, may I have permission to move freely towards that exhibit?
There's another pointer, I think, that's over there. Is there not, bailiff? Is there just a? All right. If you're gonna move over there, Mr. Pryor, number one, I'm gonna require you to wear a mask, and then number two, do you plan on touching the exhibit?
No, Judge, in light of the court's concerns, I think what I'll do is I'll try to talk this witness through this as well, rather than, and I see where the court is going, and I agree. If I'm unable to do that, then I may request that the bailiff give me another pointer and we do it that way. I agree with the court.
Okay.
So in regards to the car being parked, and I will represent to you, officer, that I've been out to that house probably 6 or 7 times. How many times have you been out to the house?
15 or 20.
Okay, when is the last time you were out there?
The last search warrant I served on the residence.
Okay. Now, on that day, can you give me the date and the time, the month and the date of when you were doing the search again? It was in June, correct?
Which search are you referring to?
The search that excavated and removed the evidence from behind the tree and the pet cemetery.
That's correct, June 9th.
Okay. And on June 9th, I'm looking at that picture and you say that's a picture taken of that situation. Is that correct?
Yes,
And I'm looking at the tree and the tree looks like it has foliage on it, correct?
correct.
Now, when I'm in the driveway and I'm standing, and quite honestly, I'll represent to you that I did the same thing you did. And the view to the tree back there where they found one of the remains is not particularly visible. So your testimony is that it is.
Objection that he's just testifying now.
The court is going to completely disregard any testimony or any information that's being provided by the attorney, Mr. Wood. If you're laying a little bit of foundation here for a question, Mr. Pryor, you may do so,
Okay,
but let the record reflect, your testimony is obviously not
all right.
evidence.
So is it still your testimony that there's a visible line of sight between where the automobile was parked and that tree back in the corner where there were remains excavated?
I never gave the testimony there was a clear line of sight. I simply said that he was looking towards the pond area.
Oh, okay. So he wasn't necessarily, he looked over there. Did he look anywhere else at that point?
I saw him looking towards the pond area.
Okay. But the question was, did he look anywhere else?
I'm sure he did look.
Okay,
Other
so he was
places.
looking around. Is that correct?
No, sir, that's not correct.
He made motions to look in different directions. Is that correct?
He wasn't looking as intently anywhere else as he was towards the pond area.
And you can agree with me that it's somewhat alarming if someone shows up at your property and decides to bring a number of people to start digging up your property. Would that cause anyone concern?
Yes,
Okay. Now, I'd like to go to the, back to the tree behind what's called the pond area. When we're talking about the excavation of the pond area, how deep down was it that the remains were found in the pond area back there?
I'd guess 6-8 inches
Shallow.
shallow.
And then in regards to the pet cemetery, how far down into the ground in the pet cemetery?
I couldn't testify to that. I wasn't there when they
Okay.
began the initial digging.
Fair enough. And based on the 25, I'm sorry, I misstated that, didn't I? 15 trips that you took out there? Is that what you said?
Yes, sir.
15 to 20? On the
Yes.
15 to 20 trips out there, do you have a recollection of how big that pet cemetery is?
Not every trip that I made out there was to the backyard.
Okay. Do you have a recollection or an estimate, having been you've been next to the pet cemetery, correct?
That's correct.
And you viewed it, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're trained as a police officer to recall facts and obtain evidence, is that correct?
That's correct.
So when you're looking at a site where they're exhuming evidence, it would seem fair to assume that you would have an idea about how large of an area this pet cemetery was. So can you tell me how large the pet cemetery is?
I didn't worry about measuring that. That's what the FBI recovery team was for.
Now, you saw a marker on the pet cemetery that marked the pet cemetery of a dog, is that correct?
A dog was dug up there, yes.
But you saw a post and like a monument or a picture of a
That's
dog,
correct.
right? And that was basically almost like a headstone, is that correct?
I couldn't tell you what the statue was
Okay.
for.
But still, you don't know what the statue was?
No, what it was for.
Oh, what it was for? What was it a statue of?
I believe it was a dog.
Okay. So there's no doubt that this was a pet cemetery, is that correct?
That's correct.
And there's no doubt that this was a well-defined fire pit that was back there, correct?
Correct.
This wasn't a fire pit that was created out of the blue. It was a fire pit that was well established for a significant amount of time. Would you agree with that?
Objection calls for speculation.
There's a question. If there's speculation in the answer, I'll direct the witness to not answer. But if the witness knows the answer to that question.
Judge, may I redefine my inquiry a little bit to
You
help in
may.
that regard?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor. When you're referring to a fire pit back there, was there an actual circular area where there was a fire pit?
That's correct.
Was there also an area where there was numerous places where they were burning various items? Is that correct?
I did not see that.
Okay. Now, you talked a little bit about your experience in identifying human remains, and that it offers a unique smell when you see human remains. Do you recall testifying about that?
I didn't testify to my experience on identifying human remains. I testified to the smell of a decomposing body.
Okay, and that is a very unique smell, is it not?
It is.
Have you ever had an occasion to smell what the smell of burning flesh smells like?
No.
Objection relevance. The witness never testified to that.
Well, he talked about the fact that when he observed the area of the pet cemetery, that he observed burned flesh and burned bones. And I think I ought to be able to inquire as to where his knowledge of making that representation comes from.
Just so I'm clear, I believe that the testimony pertaining to a smell came from the first uncovering of a body, and that's not the same place as the pet cemetery. So, Mr. Pryor, with that information, tell me where you're going.
Judge, I just want to inquire, Judge, as to where he gains his knowledge of being able to identify that the remains were actually burned, and that the bones were burned. And I'd like to know where the source of that knowledge is.
So if you want to ask questions about his background on burned flesh or whatever else, you can do so. I'll let you do that. Mr. Wood, any other comments?
Do you have any experience in identifying burned flesh and burned bones?
Define experience. You
Have
mean?
you been part of investigations that have involved other burned bones or other burned flesh?
No.
Have you ever had an occasion to smell what it's like when human remains are burned or scorched?
Yes,
Okay, and that lays off a very distinct smell, does it not?
it does.
And it's beyond pungent. It's a very, very easily identifiable smell when human remains are burned, is it not?
It is.
And that's something that would be very noticeable if in fact human remains were burned. It's very identifiable. You would agree with that, would you not?
Objection calls for speculation.
Judge, he testified about his experience. I think I ought to be able to inquire as to whether it's easily identifiable.
I'll allow the question. If the witness knows the answer to the question, he can answer. If he does not, he can say he doesn't know.
All right. Do you know whether it's easily identifiable in your experience?
freshly burned flesh.
Any
This-
burned flesh?
This had been sitting out there for quite a while, so
Okay.
the overwhelming smell of the decomposition is what I smelled.
And I appreciate that, but what I'm asking you about is whether or not the smell of burning flesh is a very identifiable smell.
That's right.
And it's very, and it's not something that's easily disguised. You would agree with that, correct?
I would agree.
Okay, now let's go back to the chart. And let's go back to, excuse me, I said chart, Judge. I want to say exhibit number 10, the demonstrative evidence.
Noted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I'll slow down, Judge. I think I think I'm getting a nod from our friend at the clerk saying for me to slow down. So, Madam Clerk, I will pace a little better. Thank you for your patience. When I'm looking at that aerial view, and I'd like you to take the pointer and put it at the front where Mr. Daybell's car is parked. Okay, directly across the street, are there any residences?
There is a resident.
Do you know the owners of those residences?
No, I do not.
Okay, did you interview them?
I did not personally.
Did anybody interview them?
I can't answer to that.
Okay. Now, directly across where the pond is, we'll go to the pond and then we'll head towards the road. Is there a residence there?
There is.
And there's no obstruction of the view of that residence to the pond. Would you agree with that?
I can't testify to that, sir.
Do you see any trees that are blocking the view from that house across the street to the pond?
I can't see what's on the other side of the road
Okay,
based on
fair
this.
enough, fair enough. And now I'd like you to put the pointer on the pet cemetery. And from the pet cemetery, go to 1900. No, I'm sorry, go to the other street, not 1900, that street. And I'm trying to recall, and I'm sorry, my memory is the same thing. I'm trying to remember the name of the street. The name of the street is what?
200 north.
200 North, that's right. And across from the pet cemetery, directly across from the pet cemetery on the other side of the street is another residence, is there not?
There is.
And then if you take the house and you go on the corner of the house that's sticking out, and almost kitty corner 200 and 1900, could you put the marker on that as well?
200 and
Yeah,
1900.
just in the very, right there. Now, if you go on the opposite side of the street, there's a residence there as well, is there not?
Over here?
Yes.
Yes.
And then a kitty corner from the Daybell house, there's a white residence across the street as well, is there not?
Your Honor, I'm going to object. This exceeds the scope of the direct examination. We never spoke about neighbors or houses outside of the Daybell property.
This is the last question I'll allow, Mr. Pryor.
All right. Is there a residence kitty corner from the Daybell residence?
Where Chad's daughter lives, is that where you're talking?
Well, thank you for that, but yes, where Emma lived at one point.
Yes, right down here there
Right.
is.
So if I count correctly, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 residences surrounding the Daybell residence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Specifically, who was present at the excavation at the pond? Do you have a recollection of who exactly was there?
No, I do not.
Do you have a recollection of who exactly was at the pet cemetery?
Not everybody. No, I do not.
Do you have a broad estimate of how many people were there?
50, 30, 50, somewhere in there.
35 to 50 people?
That's
And
accurate.
those were a combination of the Rexburg Police Department?
Rexburg Police, FBI, and Fremont County.
How many FBI agents do you recollect being there?
I can't recall. I can't answer that.
Did you have an occasion to interview David Warwick?
We did.
Was that a recorded conversation?
That was the same time Melanie Gibb was interviewed.
So the question was, again, was that a recorded conversation?
I believe it was by Lieutenant Ball.
And you interviewed Ian Pawlowski,
Yes,
and you interviewed Melanie Bordeaux, is that right?
that's correct.
And now she's going by Pawlowski, is that correct? They're married, I guess, right?
Yes,
And again, were those interviews recorded?
they were.
And Judge, if I could have just a moment to review my notes, may I?
You may.
Thank you, Your Honor.
If you're going to speak to your client, please push that button.
Judge, I think that's all I have at this point. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Wood, it is approximately 5 minutes to noon. Would you like to do redirect right now, or do you want to take a break right now and do redirect after lunch?
Your Honor, if we do any redirect, we'll wait till after lunch.
We're going to take a recess right now, then we'll reconvene at 1 p.m. And at that point, we will start redirect with Mr. Wood and the witness, Detective Hermosillo. We'll be back here in an hour.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
Holy smokes. Well, I think I'm going to take an hour break. We will see you guys back here. I'll be back live in an hour. If you want to join me, I might just let this run. I think I'm going to kill it. So thanks for joining. I'll be back in an hour. I'm going to take a recess as well.